fun weekends at the track weren't fun anymore, that's when I finished up racing. So I was always really active as a kid, played hockey for a few years, played cricket for about 5 years, played AFL football for a couple of years, and then racing took over. Raced motocross for probably 14 years. I think I was about 6 when I started and finished up when I was about 19. And I'd say I started off well with racing. I finished up 3rd in Western Australia on 65s, and I'd say throughout juniors, I was usually like a top 5 to top 10 rider, depending on like what class I was racing or what end of the age group I was in. I raced the Junior Nationals 7 times, raced first one at Chidlow, which was really, really muddy. There was one at Wanneroo that we also raced, and then some of the ones over east we raced at South Coast Motorcycle Club, I think it was called, in Adelaide. There was a couple in Coolum, there was one in Canberra, and another one in Maffra as well. So life was bikes. I was really lucky to have the parents I have to be able to do what we did and travel as much as what we did. I had boxes and boxes of riding magazines like Racer X and ADB. I'd watched the Great Outdoors DVDs and the Bar to Bar DVDs hundreds of times because I just loved watching racing. Everything about bikes and racing was me. So as a kid, like, I didn't go to kids' parties or hang out with friends on the weekend because I was always riding or racing. And if I had the choice of going riding or going to a kid's party or hanging out with a friend, the question didn't even need to be asked. I'd be going riding. So the earliest form of training I can remember doing was when I was probably in year 5. So I was like 9 or 10 years old. I joined up to do like squad or club level swimming 3 or 4 times a week, just trying to get fitter for racing. We used to do laps and laps and laps of the pool for 45 minutes to an hour. And I did swimming for probably 5 years. So I've always loved sport, like training and being active. It's always been part of my life. And I remember being on the forums at that time looking for any info that I could get on types of training that I should be doing specifically to help me with my racing. And at that time, it was even harder than it is now to be able to find good quality information to be able to help with your racing. The general advice was like, oh, just do anything that gets your heart rate up. I remember doing push-ups in my room before school. We had a games room where I had a weight bar and used to do some exercises with it. And then later on, I did some other forms of training as well. Like I did RPM spin classes for probably a year or so. And then I used to do some gym exercises after that as well, after I'd finished the spin sessions. Mainly just trying to work on my legs. I used to get sore legs when I was riding. So I was like, okay, I'll throw in some leg extensions and some leg work after to try and see if it helps. Did a fair bit of push bike riding as well, like just making jumps at the park and doing, you know, general kids stuff. But for all the effort that I put in, I always felt that there was other riders that did no training, put in like the smallest amount of effort with their riding and still had more fitness, more energy, more speed, got better results on the bike, which I guess was like an internal frustration for me. I still felt like even with all that work, I still couldn't put a full race together. I could never figure out why. So I thought maybe I'm not training hard enough or I'm not pushing hard enough. So my whole thing was just like trying to put in more effort than everyone else. But when I look back now, that sounds silly because there's not many 10-year-olds that I know that want to go and train 3 or 4 times a week and do push-ups in their bedroom before they go to school to be able to get better at racing. The effort was definitely there, just not the results, the transfer over to the bike. So I used to do things like I was going to bed at 7:30 p.m. the night before state rounds to try and get extra sleep. I'd get all my goggles organized during the week so I could just focus on racing on race day and I wasn't mucking around with that stuff. We'd go to the track early in the morning, like hours early, wake up at 5 in the morning to get to the track so that I'd have time to be able to get set up and walk the track. Sometimes we'd even go to the track the day before to be able to have a look as well. I'd make sure I had energy bars and sports drinks in the car so I could have them between races. I'd spend my time between races watching different sections of the track to see where the fast guys were going. We'd go riding even through the summertime when it was like 40 degrees here in Perth. We'd get up really, really early and go to the track and continue riding throughout the summer when everyone else was having time off. But still like 10 to 15 minute races, especially at a state round where the track was really rough and you've got the best riders in the country racing, always left me with no energy halfway through the race. So I just tried harder with my training and just tried to keep at it, hoping that somehow things would get better. So as I got older and had to start planning to get a job and do some work and contribute to society, I decided I wanted to be an accountant. So the reason I wanted to be an accountant is when I got my KX65, I remember being in the Kawasaki dealership and seeing the guy who owned it sitting in his office at the back behind where all the bikes were displayed. So he had heaps of cool moto stuff displayed in his office and he always had new bikes that he was riding and he had a couple of kids and they used to always have new bikes as well. They had a KX65 which had like all black plastics on it, black rims, pro circuit graphics. And back in the day, like having custom graphics and black plastics, that stuff wasn't as popular in say the early 2000s. And I also remember he had this shoey helmet in there and it had like a chrome helmet fin and a chrome mouthpiece at the front. And it was like a Hot Wheels shoey special collaboration, special edition helmet, which I just used to see and I thought it was absolutely awesome. From that point on, I was like, that's the guy that I want to be. Like I want to live the life of this Kawasaki dealer. The advice I got if I wanted to make this happen and be able to have my own bike shop is that it needed to earn some money first to be able to do that. I happened to be getting some good grades in accounting at school, and it seemed like a good bit of knowledge that could be helpful if I was going to go and have a bike shop and have a business. So that's the path I went down. In my mind, I was thinking, I'll become an accountant, earn some good money, get some skills, and then go and start my bike shop. I ended up getting a job at a small accounting firm while I was studying at uni. So I didn't know a single accountant. If you think about most motocross people, they're more tradesmen or hands-on people. Very rarely do you come across an accountant that's out there riding and racing. So at 18 or 19 years old, I found an accountant directory for Western Australia on Google, and I emailed every single one of them asking if I could come and work there and be able to learn rather than just learning stuff out of a textbook at uni. I emailed probably 50 accounting businesses. 45 pretended like I didn't even exist and didn't respond. I got about 5 responses back. All told me that they can't help and they're not interested. And then I had one accounting firm. I had a guy that messaged and said, yes, we're actually looking for a junior member for our team. Are you able to come in on Monday? I ended up with paid work at a small accounting firm while I was studying at the same time. So at the same time, in 2010, a friend from racing said he was doing this really hard training at a gym in these group sessions. So he dragged me down there with him to be able to train. The first thing I remember seeing from the car park before I'd even got in the gym was a bunch of 40-plus-year-old guys lifting these big weights overhead. If you know what bumper plates are, that's what they were using. A bumper plate is a 20-kilo bumper plate might be, say, this big, whereas a 20-kilo steel plate is this big. So a bumper plate looks much heavier, but it's actually not. I had no idea, but just looking at them, I was scared. And the reason I was scared is because I thought I was just going to get big and bulky and get arm pump, and it was actually going to make me worse on the bike rather than making me better. This was a weird situation as well, because this is the period of my life that a series of events happened at the right time for me to be able to be where I am now with coaching races. So in 2010, I had a bike that had a heap of problems with it. So it was a 2007 Suzuki RMZ 250. I mean, it was one of those bikes where you just have problem after problem after problem. Had like the rear brake not working properly after re-bleeding it and adjusting the angle and all the rest of it. Had the power cutting out where at low revs, when you'd rev it, it would have like nothing, and then all of a sudden it would come on. Had a clutch that would lose tension, probably from it being used too much because of not having any power. We pulled it apart and put it back together plenty of times, sent it to people to look at, and still no solution. Wasted a whole season really trying to sort this bike out and get it fixed. Dad ended up getting me a new bike. This was a 2011 Suzuki RMZ 250. So this was the next model, like next generation for the 250. So it was different to the 2007 that I had. Which if you've had this model of bike, you'll also know that this bike comes with a problem, and that was a gearbox that had a false neutral. If I remember correctly, it was between like 3rd and 4th gear. If you ever want to lose your confidence in riding a bike fast, ride a bike that has gearbox problems. I wasn't riding properly because I was always scared of what the bike was going to do. Going up to a jump flat out in 3rd gear and hitting neutral, shifting to 4th on the way up the up ramp is some pretty scary stuff. It was more problem after problem trying to figure out what's going on. So that was pretty much like 2 seasons wasted. Not to mention the longer motos in seniors and rougher tracks were just killing me physically. I was exhausted after every race, as well as being 16 and racing with fully grown adults as well. After 2 seasons of this, it ended up with both my dad and I being frustrated with each other and with the bike, and fun weekends at the track weren't fun anymore. That's when I finished up racing. So back to the training. When I first started at the gym, I thought it was going to make me a worse rider because of all the heavy weights, and I just wanted endurance for the bike. So this is the weird transition that allowed me to be able to build the skill set that I have today. I kept going with the training and the weights because I found an enjoyment in lifting the weights that I didn't know that I had, because everything had been about racing up until that point. And my racing days were on the way out. So I was still riding, but I just wasn't really enjoying it. But even though I thought lifting weights would have a negative effect on my riding, at that point I didn't care, because I was actually enjoying lifting the weights more and going to the gym more than I was actually getting on the bike, which sounds crazy for someone who loves bikes so much. There's a lot of things we did in those group training sessions that weren't too helpful for riding at all. But the one thing that I did learn was that strength builds everything. The stronger I got, the better I got on the rower, the more power I had on the exercise bike, the easier bodyweight exercises became, and more importantly, the lighter my 250 started to feel on race day, which went against all of the information I'd ever received from friends, from riding coaches, from riding schools that I'd done, from what I'd read in magazines. I'd always been told, don't lift heavy weights, you want to build endurance. Weights will make you big and bulky, they'll give you arm pump. Although my 250 had problems, now me racing a 15-minute race was no longer a problem. Physically, it was the best I'd felt on the bike the whole time that I'd been riding and racing. I finally had the strength that I needed to be able to put the bike where I wanted it. Once I'd finished racing, I was enjoying going to the gym and training so much, I started doing fitness competitions. So these fitness competitions kind of filled that gap in my life from where racing was. When you've raced bikes all over the country from the age of 6 to the age of 19 and you've never missed a single season, you kind of forget like what a weekend looks like, because weekends were just made up of driving, unloading and loading trailers and racing. And especially as I got to like 12, 13 years old, I had a part-time job at a hardware store on Saturdays for a full day. You used to work from 9 o'clock till 4 or 5 o'clock. And then I'd race on Sundays and then go back to school for the week and then worked on the holidays as well. I trained my ass off for these fitness competitions, sometimes twice a day. I lived and breathed training like I did my riding. Everything was about training. Everything was about getting my body to be able to perform at its best. I went over east to compete and did quite a few competitions up until about 2014. I enjoyed it and I really learned a lot about training. To come 2014, I decided accounting wasn't for me. I'd been studying for 3 years, failed a few units, probably because I spent all my time training and reading about getting better at training for the last 5 or so years. And I remember sitting there getting ready to go in for an exam, and I just packed up all my stuff and went home. I made the decision there and then that this wasn't what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I guess the goal of having a bike shop at that point had faded because I had stepped away from riding and racing. Didn't really see the reason behind why I was doing all of the study and stuff that I hated. And I hated every minute of it. There's not a single moment I can remember enjoying when it comes to accounting, except when it was time to go home so I could go and train. I decided I wanted to do something that I loved most and spent all my time doing anyway, which was training and finding ways for my body to perform at its best. I'd always trained or been active since I was 10 years old. My favorite subject at school was sport. If I forgot my maths book at home, it was bad luck. If I forgot my sport uniform at home, I'd message mum to come and drop it off so I didn't miss sport. I just loved trying to get my body to move and to be able to do more. This is when I decided I wanted to do something that I loved for work. I wanted to pass on all the things that I'd learned about training and performance to other people wanting to perform at their best. And that set me on the path of becoming a strength and conditioning coach. Got my credentials together and started coaching. So I started off coaching for free at the gym that I did all my training at anyway, which we got a free membership in return. And then I landed a paid coaching gig at an unnamed gym part-time and also worked at a hardware store part-time. Long story short is I was told I was going to be given more hours at this gym that I was working at. I thought, this is great. My career's building. I'm going to be able to have a full-time job working at this gym. Quit my job at the hardware store thinking my life is on track, only to be told the following week that it was actually the opposite. My hours had been cut back. I was given a few 30-minute sessions at 5 a.m. in the morning to take with a 30-minute drive either way for each one. I was in the shit at that time, but at the same time, I'd already made the mental shift that I was a coach now, not a hardware store worker. I was telling the owner of the gym that I trained at about what had happened, and he said, why don't you just start training people here and start your own thing? So that's what I did. Probably one of the scariest things to do, to go out on your own and start a business, especially at 21 years old. So I had no accounting degree, no accounting job, no hardware job, and now no job at the gym either. I felt like for so long I had my life path figured out of becoming an accountant and earning money and opening up a bike shop, and now everything was kind of up in the air. But at the same time, I had nothing to lose because I felt like I just lost everything anyway. Little did I know at the time, this is where it was all going to start. A few months into starting the business, I did a business course to help me get set up. And they were telling us about how you should focus on working with a specific group of people and become really great at that, rather than spreading yourself thin and trying to work with hundreds of different people with hundreds of different goals. I had no idea who I wanted to work with at the time. I was like, anyone who wanted to perform at their best and be able to get better. But I knew that I did like working with athletes or people that had a sport or competition that they were working towards. One of the questions they asked was, think of something you might have done or had a challenge with when you were younger that you were able to overcome. And I thought that wasn't too helpful because all I'd done my whole life was race motocross for 13 or 14 years. And I'm only 21 years old, so there's not much else to my life. But that was what triggered the next thought, which was I really struggled with race fitness, like really struggled, especially with the amount of effort and sacrifice I put into it. I felt like it was just never enough. It just never worked. It just never helped me on the bike or got me to where I needed to be racing wise. But the thing that was different now is I'd been going balls to the wall with these fitness competitions for the last 5 or so years. I was soaking up so much stuff about training and fueling and eating and carb loading, strength exercises and strength programs. And I didn't know any of this stuff even existed beforehand. I didn't even know it was there when I was racing. I remember thinking like this would be cool. Talking to riders that were just like me, wanting to get fit for racing and experiencing the same frustration like I was because they don't know how to train and what to do either. I thought I could give them the tools and information I wish I had had when I was racing. I was like, this is perfect. This is my 2 passions combined into one. I was thinking there's no one else that would be more equipped or that understands the requirements of being a racer more than me. I raced at a high level all over Australia for 14 years, and there's no one else that also has the knowledge of the training and nutrition side of things. In my years of racing, everyone was too one-sided. Either you get people who are really good at racing themselves or coaching bike drills, so like a riding coach, but they don't have the knowledge on the training and nutrition stuff because they've spent their whole life studying racing. They spent their whole life studying skills and bikes and getting faster. They haven't spent their whole life training and doing nutrition and getting in the gym for thousands of hours and testing out different training programs. Or you go the opposite side and you get a strength and conditioning coach that knows heaps about the training and nutrition. They spend heaps of time in the gym. But that's the problem. The problem is they spent all of their time in the gym. They still think that the bike does all the work, and they've got no idea what a rider needs because they've never raced a bike before. So my goal from then on was to be able to build a program specifically for riders and racers to be able to give them the help that I wish I had had when I was racing. I started with a small group of road racing guys here in Perth in 2016, and that was in the gym. And then it shifted to working solely online. And what this allowed me to do is to be able to work with riders and racers from around the world now for all sorts of different events, rather than only being able to work with riders that worked within, say, 20 kilometers of where the gym is. So this allowed me to be able to work with riders getting ready for races like Finke Desert Race, Hattah Desert Race, the Pro MX here in Australia, the Pro Motocross over in America. We've had riders do Simpson Desert crossings. We've helped riders prep for the Roof of Africa, Baja 1000. We've had guys in the British Superbike, Grassroots Hard Enduro, the Mint 400, Australian Speedway Championships, and the list goes on. So this is our 10th year coaching now, and I say we because it's not just me anymore. We have a small group of rock stars who help to be able to make our program what it is today. And life also looks a little bit different compared to the racing days as well. I also have my partner Kylie, and I have a 3.5-year-old daughter Madison who I enjoy spending time with as well. So I still do get a great level of enjoyment from motorsport and being part of it. I just got out to the Speedway recently to be able to watch the sprint cars, got to catch up with one of our riders who came to Perth to race Speedway bikes, went to Melbourne last year to watch the World Supercross and got to meet a few of you guys in person, watch the Supercross every Sunday morning, and I still really love training. I train 4 times a week at the gym, and I like being active as much as I can, and I also really enjoy tweaking and testing different things with my own training and my own nutrition to be able to help develop our programs and make them even better for our riders.